Hi, I'm Skip Nipper. Welcome to Skip's Corner, the podcast where I tell you about not only Nashville's great baseball history and traditions,
shot to right, a one-hop liner,
but certainly about its past. And you will hear a little bit about its present and future, too.
Yes, he can. It makes the waist-high catch.
There are great stories about Tom Wilson Park, Herschel Greer Stadium, Sulphur Dell, and the players, coaches, and fans who love everything about baseball. And every once in a while, you will get to hear from a special guest who will share their fondness and even passion for the great game.
The high fly ball down the right field corner, going way back, hits a lead-off home run.
I often get asked about Sulphur Dell, where it was located, the configuration of the ballpark, and how it stands in relation to First Horizon Park, now the home of the Nashville Sounds. And it's very close. There's an overlap there. But I thought I'd go back and do a review. I've done this a couple of years ago, and you can certainly get more information on my website, either baseballinnashville.com or sulphurdell.com. Both addresses take you to the same place. And there are many stories there that I write, biographies, try to give as much information as I can over time, a timeline, if you will, of certain events that happen on certain days. Just remember, if you type in Sulphur Dell, SULPHURDELL.com, that often spell check will change one of those U's, the second one, to E. But remember, there's no E in sulfur, at least not for Sulphur Dell. And of course, there is an E in Dell. But anyway, I just thought I'd review Sulphur Dell, maybe give you a little bit of information. Maybe it'll pique your interest into something else you'd like to ask me about. In the mid-19th century, Nashville's recreational area was known as Sulphur Springs Bottom. It's making a connection here already, isn't it? It was so named because there was a natural sulfur spring nearby, and the area designated for a ball field was bordered by what we know now as 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, and Jackson Street. It was all referred to as Athletic Park as early as 1870. Now today, Jackson Street, the name has been changed to Junior Gillum Way, and it's where the entrance to First Horizon Park is right now, just one block off of Jefferson Street. Nashville's early professional teams go way back. With the city's first venture into professional baseball in 1885 in a new league, the Southern League, a new grandstand was built. And the Nashville Americans were a member of the inaugural Southern League. And although the league would go in and out of business for the next 15 years, Athletic Park was home field for ball games. Now, the team was known as the Americans because the Nashville Daily American newspaper made an agreement that they would give extra attention to Nashville's professional teams' contests, and if they could just refer to them as the Americans, and they did, as a connection to the newspaper there. In his sports column published in the Nashville Tennessean on January the 14th, 1908, I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, Grantland Rice referred to the local ballpark not as Athletic Park, but as Sulphur Spring Dell, signaling the mark of a new name for the historical site, Sulphur Dell. Now, in later years, Nashville Banner sports editor Fred Russell suggested that Rice could not find a word to rhyme with Sulphur Spring Bottom, thus the new moniker for Nashville's baseball home, Sulphur Dell. And new grandstands were constructed in the 1908 season, and they were expanded in 1920. And not only did the Nashville Professional Club play there, local amateur and semi-pro teams played at the park when the Nashville Vols of the Southern Association were out of town throughout the 20th century. Now, these included amateur and semi-pro games. Tom Wilson's Black Nashville Standard Giants used Sulphur Dell, and when renamed the Elite Giants, they used the famous ballpark as home field until Wilson built his own ballpark, Tom Wilson Park, in 1929. Now, the configuration of Sulphur Dell was such that batters had to face the pitcher and look into the sun. Now, remember, there were no lights put into Sulphur Dell until after 1929. I think 1931. And so the ball games started in the afternoon, and a lot of times they would start in the late afternoon. So they would allow for people to get off work and walk down to the ballpark to see a late afternoon games, so games may not have started until 3 or 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And since the batters faced towards the state capitol, the setting sun would often be in the batter's eyes. Well, at the end of the 1926 season, it was determined that the ballpark would be turned around so that the afternoon sun would not come into play for hitters. There was another reason for the reconfigured ballpark: new ownership. On October the 1st, 1926, just a few days after the 1926 season ended for the Nashville Vols, 4 investors took over the Nashville Baseball Club. Rogers Caldwell, who was a local horse breeder; Jack Whaley, co-publisher of Southern Lumberman, a regional publication; Stanley P. Horn, also a co-publisher of Southern Lumberman, who's also a sports writer; and Jimmy Hamilton, the manager of the Nashville Vols since 1923 for 3 years. In the first week of December, the new owners announced that the existing wooden grandstand would be torn down and a new steel and concrete structure would be built. Now, that's a little unusual, with 2 of the owners producing a publication about the wood industry in the Southeast, and the new ballpark was expected to be one of the best ballpark facilities in baseball for its size, a steel and concrete structure. J.B. Hansen and Company was awarded the construction contract, and the architect was Marr and Holman. Now, I can't tell you exactly that this is true, but I've been told that the next year, when Toledo wanted a new ballpark built for the Mud Hens, they also hired Marr and Holman as architect, and they used similar plans as they did for Sulphur Dell. So the ballpark was turned around in 1927. Now, to give you a perspective, home plate with the wooden grandstand up and through the 1926 season was about where the entrance is today of First Horizon Park, Jackson Avenue and 4th Avenue. Today, that is Junior Gillum Way, and there's no 4th Avenue now. That was taken away when the ballpark was put in its place. But the turned around Sulphur Dell had an unusual outfield dimension due to the shape of the city block in which the ballpark was located. Left field was 334 feet from home plate. The deepest part of the park was at center field at 421 feet, and right field was only an unbelievable 262 feet. And the closeness of the fans to the ball players was a distinct feature. From first base to the grandstand was 42 feet, and even closer to the third base at 26 feet. But that was not all. The playing surface was below street level, and there was an embankment around the entire outfield that was part of the playing field. Now, the low-lying park was prone to flooding in the spring. Early games were often canceled, rescheduled, or moved to places like Vanderbilt so teams could play. With teams having to play on a field that resembled a drained-out wash tub, players would often mockingly refer to it as Sulphur Hell. Now, the Cumberland River is only a few blocks away, and it was prone to flooding, and so the whole area, and that being a low-lying area, often those games were not played in the spring. And the right field embankment began at 224 feet from home plate, rising at a 45-degree angle towards the fence, ending at that unbelievably short 262 feet. And the embankment in left field began at 301 feet from home plate. Remember, there's a slight embankment all the way around, although it was more pronounced in right field. And the outfield fence was made of wood and was 16 feet high, running from the right field pole to a point 186 feet towards center field. There, the fence was capped by a screen that added an additional 30 feet of height, but decreased to 22.5 feet high midway to center field. Now, in later years, the screen height remained the same, but a second tier of signage was added in right field. Originally built to hold 7,500 fans, the construction was barely finished when the team came home to play exhibition games before the beginning of the 1927 regular season. The first game in the newly turned around Sulphur Dell was an exhibition game played against the Minneapolis Millers of the American Association on March the 25th, 1927. The Millers won 5-3 in a game that lasted 2 hours and 5 minutes. And here's a little bit of a history tidbit for you. Dick Loftus, right fielder for the Minneapolis Millers, hit the first home run in the new configuration of the ballpark. Blinky Horn, sports writer for the Nashville Tennessean, referred to right field as the right center dump in his account of the game the next day, calling attention to not only the unusual design of the ballpark, but acknowledging the smell that the nearby city dump and stockyard offered to the lingering odor in the air. In the fourth inning of an exhibition game between the Vols and Milwaukee on April the 1st, pinch hitter John Black hit a home run to become the first Nashville player to hit one over the fence in the new Sulphur Dell. And Horn wrote that the ball cleared the wall beyond the old 4th Avenue entrance to the bleachers. After additional games were played, exhibition games, of course, the Nashville Vols returned to Sulphur Dell for the opening game of the 1927 Southern Association season against the Atlanta Crackers. But with the Vols losing 10-2, Atlanta's George Mule Haas became the first player to hit a home run during the regular season in the new layout. It was a first-inning shot, followed by a fourth-inning blast by Walter Gilbert, also of the Crackers. Opening day attendance was announced at 7,535 fans, just a few fans over the capacity. And the first night game was played at Sulphur Dell on May the 18th, 1931. And again, the Vols lost, this time to Mobile, 8-1. But the next season, on opening day, April the 12th, 1932, attendance was an unbelievable 14,502. Now, where do you put that many people in a stadium grandstand that only holds 7,500? Well, that's easy. The outfield was lined off with rope to accommodate the crowd. Remember, there are hills in the outfield, so that's where they sat the overflow crowd. It was the largest crowd to see a game at Sulphur Dell. And 6 years later, in 1938, the seating capacity was increased to 8,500 with some bleachers down the left field line. It was a bandbox, says Robert Pat Burgess, who was the scoreboard operator and public address announcer as a teenager in the mid-1940s. He said short right field was what made it tough, with the fence and the screen added to the fence. And some guys had the Sulphur Dell stroke, an uppercut swing that was needed to slug one out of the park. A lot of players didn't have it, and their careers suffered when playing in parks with normal field dimensions. And no matter what we called it, it was our home ballpark, and we loved it, said Gene Smith, a member of the Old Timers Baseball Association and a former minor leaguer, the nephew of famous Jim Turner, pitching coach for the New York Yankees, who spent one season as manager of the Vols in 1960. And Gene went on to say, and it had the best pitcher's mound I ever threw off of. Now, that Sulphur Dell stroke that Pat Burgess talked about was not always good for these players, as he mentioned, because Larry Gilbert, who was here for 10 years from 1939 through 1948 as field manager, boy, he stacked his club with those left-handed hitters, but they had to do that uppercut to get the ball over that tall fence out in right field, even though it was a short 262 feet to the wall. They still remember that wooden fence and that screen. And that didn't bode too well, especially for Bob Lennon, who hit 64 home runs in 1954. And when he went on to the majors, that uppercut, Sulphur Dell stroke, it just didn't fit for some of those major league ballparks. And I think he only hit 7 the rest of his career, which weren't too many more years past his time in Nashville. Now, I have to tell you about Negro Leagues baseball because it's an important part, an important segment of Nashville's baseball history. And Sulphur Dell was a favorite ballpark for visiting Negro League teams, drawing large crowds to see teams like the Chicago American Giants, the Kansas City Monarchs, the Birmingham Black Barons, and the New York Black Yankees. They all played here. It was home to the Nashville Elite Giants, the Nashville Black Vols, and the Nashville Cubs, and 1949 and 50, 51, maybe the Nashville Stars. Many black players grew up in Nashville and honed their skills at Sulphur Dell, including Hall of Fame member Turkey Stearns, Bruce Petway, and Dodgers favorite Jim Jr. Gillum, who the street is named for in front of First Horizon Park, Jim Zapp, Sidney Bunch Jr., and Clinton Butch McCord. Now, the ballpark was remodeled again in 1951, and on opening day, April the 17th of 1951, Nashville Sulphur Dell celebrated 24 years of service to local citizens with a fresh look that included a remodeled facade, new turnstiles, brick walls, wider exits, and other improvements. But unchanged were the dumps in the outfield and the short right field fence. Those were the true personalities of the ballpark. Nashville historian Paul Clements once told me, Dad would take me to Sulphur Dell 2 or 3 times a summer, and we would catch the Vols. My biggest hero wasn't a player. It was Larry Munson, who did the play-by-play of Vol games through all those years of my childhood. But Sulphur Dell was not just a baseball venue, though. It was a concert venue. Concerts by Tex Ritter, Jackie Wilson, James Brown even were held there. And Dick Clark brought his Cavalcade of Stars. And Esther Williams brought her Water Follies. And I remember going to see the Shrine Circus outdoors. It drew large crowds. And then there were barnstorming baseball exhibitions held at the memorable ballpark before its demise. And there was a demise, and it was sad for a lot of Nashville citizens who had gone to ball games there and seen those other events as well. When attendance dwindled, attention to the ballpark did too. The last professional baseball game was played at Sulphur Dell on September the 8th, 1963, as the Vols of the South Atlantic League faced Lynchburg in a doubleheader. Nashville outfielder Charlie Tusher belted 3 home runs in that doubleheader as the Vols won over Lynchburg 6-3 and 2-1. And those were the last homers by a professional player at Sulphur Dell. It was the last hurrah of the famous park. Amateur baseball was played at Sulphur Dell in 1964, and in 1965, if you can believe it, it was turned into a speedway. It became a towing lot for Metro Nashville and eventually was demolished on April the 16th in 1969. I told you earlier that the ballpark was called Athletic Park as early as 1870. So 1870 to 1969, even though there were no games there all the time, all the way through that, that's a 100-year existence, and there are not many ballparks around anymore that have seen ball games for that long. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review of Sulphur Dell. You can always write me at 262downright at gmail.com if you have questions. Of course, you can go to my website, once again, baseballinnashville.com or sulphurdell.com, and go to any of the stories, and down at the bottom where it says leave a comment, just send a comment and I'll pick it up and I'll respond to you as I'm able. Once again, thanks for listening in. I better call out attention to my producer, David Nipper, my technical guru, who produces not only my podcast, but gives me great information about the technical part of podcasting, and I'm grateful to him. Enjoy the game.